Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Breckland's Cabinet on Monday, the 15th of November, 2021. It is 9:30, so we'll now commence the meeting. Just a bit of formal housekeeping. In the event of the fire alarm going out, your emergency exit located to your right-hand side, and for whatever reason, if they're blocked, then two doors you came through. Fire exit is located this end of the corridor or the main door you came through. Ablutions are located through this door here, down the corridor, both male and female and disabled facilities. And the refreshments at the back if you require them. Anybody who requires any first aid assistance, if you go to the refectory kitchen, which is just located in the hallway, and one of the staff will be able to support you there. This is a meeting in public. This is not a public meeting. So if I could ask members of the public who have joined us in person today, you are most welcome. And if there's an opportunity for me to call you in, I will do so, but please don't interrupt the meeting, the proceedings which are taking place. Move forward to minutes of the meeting, which took place on the 20th of September 2021, contained within pages 5 to 13 within the agenda pack. Are Cabinet colleagues happy that they're a true and accurate record? Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Item 2, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies from Councillor Mark Robinson.
Lovely, thank you. And Councillor Webb is going to present that report on his behalf. Item 3, urgent business. I haven't got any I wish to raise. Item 4, declarations of interest for any member of the council. If you wish to speak on an item and there is a declaration of interest which isn't already declared, please do indicate prior to that item. And item 5, non-members wishing to address the meeting. Thank you. It's a fantastic turnout. I can see that you're all present today, and members of the public, I have got 3 names who may wish to speak later on agenda item 8. So thank you. Item 6, Chairman's announcements. There are none. Item 7, Breckland Community Funding Application, standing item. Councillor Webb, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As previous months, we have actually exhausted the funding for the events. So unfortunately, on this occasion, there isn't anything to bring forward. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. Item 8 then, which is the reference from the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. This is to consider the report which is discussed at the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission held on the 28th of October 2021. Councillor Clausen, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully you can hear me through this, but as you can probably hear, I'm absolutely full of cold, and unless this item was on the agenda, I wouldn't be here. I'd be tucked up in bed, I can assure you. So I will just really very briefly introduce the item. The issues raised by the Overview and Scrutiny Commission are in an appendix. The rest of the report is basically as was presented to the previous cabinet. For the detail, if I might, Chairman, because of the way my head and voice are feeling, I would like Rob to take us through the substantive points in the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. As members are no doubt aware, the matter of the local plan review has previously been before you on the 20th of September. It was subsequently called in by 3 members of the council to Overview and Scrutiny Commission on the 28th of September, and they in turn decided to refer back to Cabinet for reconsideration. On the 20th of September, you agreed as a Cabinet to undertake a single policy partial review of policy INFO 3. Apologies for the language, it is technical at certain points, in parallel with a substantive review of the whole local plan. The Overview and Scrutiny Commission has asked that Cabinet reconsider this decision and in particular the agreed timetable for the works, with a clear desire to see a shorter timeline. With regard to governance, I should point out at this point that the decision taken today will mark the end of the decision-making process, and there are no further opportunities for calling in line with our constitution. The report before you presents 3 possible timelines. The scope of work, the comprehensive review of the local plan, remains the same for each option. It is the opinion of officers that the issues with INFO 3 go to the very heart of the local plan, and a partial review is therefore not appropriate. I'll now turn to options 1 and 2 within the report. There is, of course, a third option looking at 10 years. Whilst this has clear budgetary benefits, there are significant disadvantages to this approach, and therefore I don't consider this further. Option 1 is recommended by officers and was the option preferred by Cabinet in September. It would see the partial review submitted by 2022 and the substantive review submitted by 2026. Option 2, which more reflects the wishes and desires of Overview and Scrutiny Commission to see a quicker timetable, would see the partial review also completed on the same timescale, but the substantive review submitted by 2023. I think it's accepted by all that the partial INFO3 review needs to be submitted in November 2022, with the inspection completing sometime in all likelihood in 2023. I therefore won't go to this in any further detail at this stage. As I understand it, the main difference of opinion is the time taken for the substantive review of the local plan to be completed. It is the opinion of officers that although it's possible in theory to complete a substantive review in 3 years, i.e. option 2, it would in all reality be very difficult to achieve, and this is for a number of reasons. The availability of resource to complete the work, as members will be aware, there is a national shortage of qualified planning officers, and this would significantly impact the ability to do the work over that time period. To undertake the work in this time period would see the level of engagement and consultation both within the authority and, more importantly, outside of the authority curtailed. And while this might be palatable at this stage, I think once we get into the process, that will be less and less palatable. I think there are also clear interdependencies between the different pieces of work that are necessary and will be undertaken as part of this piece of work. It would also cost more, and the profile spend would impact by circa £500,000 in the next financial year. And importantly, history tells us that it takes some time, between 6 to 7 years, to complete a substantive review of a local plan. And therefore, in our opinion, 3 years is just too quick and not achievable. I can accept the concern that has been presented about the impacts of local plan policies diminishing over time. And it goes without saying that we should look to complete the review as speedily as we think reasonably possible. We do not, as officers, however, accept that there is an arbitrary date in November 2024 when the local plan that we currently have is 5 years old, at which point that these policies go out of date. This is not the case. There is no cliff edge. Whether local plan policies are in or out of date is a matter of planning judgment before and after this date in November 2024. Officers believe that it is reasonable to complete the substantive review of the local plan within 6 years. The reasons for this being that the resource will be available over that time frame to complete the work. It would allow effective consultation engagement, both with you as members of the authority, but more importantly with members of local communities. And it will allow the issue of the interdependencies between INFO3 and all the policies within the local plan to be worked through and considered. It will still cost more than budgeted, as I believe you're aware, like the shorter option that's presented, but its overall impact and the challenges faced next year in particular would not be the same. It is therefore on balance the consideration of all these factors why we as officers recommend option 1 for Cabinet to consider. We understand the desire to go faster, but we want to put forward a timescale and approach to members that we believe is realistic and achievable. Chairman, officers recommend option 1 to Cabinet as detailed in the body of the report. I appreciate that there will be no doubt questions and comments on this matter, and therefore I have Simon and Andy here to support me in answering those questions. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Rob. So we'll move straight to questions then, as the normal convention commence with Cabinet colleagues, then wider members of the district, and then depending on where we are with time, then I would invite those 3 individuals who have requested to speak prior to the start of the meeting. So question from Cabinet colleagues. I've got Paul Hewitt, then Alison Webb, then Sarah Suggett, please.
Thank you, Sam. I sat through the whole of the OSC meeting, and I listened with a lot of interest in terms of the concerns raised by OSC, and I read the suggested wording by one of my fellow councillors, actually, in terms of bringing the recommendation back to us as Cabinet. And I heard language like there is a cliff edge. This is going to be the Wild West. Our neighbourhood plans will lose all of their weight. I read words like our communities will be at the mercy of developers for 5 years. There will be inappropriate development in places and a scale that developers can only dream of. This is quite emotive language, Chair, but it reflects, I believe, some concerns. So what comfort can we take that actually that neighbourhood plans will continue to have weight? There will be no cliff edge in 2024, and that this council and planning judgment will still be key in future development within our communities.
Thanks, Paul. Simon, are you happy to take that question?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think it's firstly, I think important to say that neighbourhood plans are an important part of the development plan process, and it's a legal requirement that you make decisions on planning applications in accordance with the development plan. And in Breckland, that's the local plan, and where appropriate, the neighbourhood plan, depending on the area in which the development's located. Neighbourhood plans are prepared by community groups. They're not prepared by the local authority. And I think it's important to say that those local groups need to ensure that their neighbourhood plans are up to date as well. When you're looking at a neighbourhood plan that is newly created, then it carries full weight. So, for example, we're considering the same Tony neighbourhood plan here today, and if Cabinet agree that, then it will be made and it will carry full weight in the decision-making process. And because it's more recent than the local plan, if there is any conflict between the neighbourhood plan and the local plan, it would effectively trump the local plan. And paragraph 30 of the NPPF makes that absolutely crystal clear. In terms of existing and older neighbourhood plans, there is a set of criteria set out in the NPPF and in national planning guidance against which you would assess a neighbourhood plan's weight in the decision-making process in the circumstance that a local plan is either out of date or doesn't have a 5-year housing land supply. And that is very dependent on the age of the neighbourhood plan, i.e. is it 2 years or less from when it was made in terms of its age? Does it provide allocations within the local plan? And does the authority have a 3-year housing land supply, or has it delivered, I think it's 45% of its housing over the last 5 years, I think it is. So if it meets those criteria, then it will still continue to attract full weight in terms of non-strategic policies. It's also open to neighbourhood plans to review their neighbourhood plans to ensure it meets those criteria. There doesn't have to be a local plan in place to enable them to do that, and there doesn't have to be an up-to-date local plan in place to enable them to do that. So they can still review their own policies as well. Thank you, Chairman.
And Rob, obviously Councillor Hewitt's question around cliff edge again. Do you just want to refer and expand on that then, please?
Yeah, just to be absolutely clear, a whole plan or the policies within a plan do not automatically go out of date after a 5-year period from which local plan's addressed. As Simon's explained, it's over a period of time policies go out of date. There is no cliff edge when the plan is 5 years old. It's the length of time since it was first produced, but it can still be relied upon after that date. And to pick up the emergent policies side of things, clearly as the current plan will remain in place whilst we be developing a new plan as part of the substantive review, and over a period of time as we move towards submission, that the evidence and the work that is done as part of the new process will start to carry weight as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that decisions will still continue to be made in accordance with the development plan and all other material considerations. It's a planning judgment about the weight you give to those policies, and as Rob says, it's over time. It's not an immediate cliff edge.
So there is no cliff edge. Neighbourhood plans continue to have weight, but like with any neighbourhood plan, their weight will always fade over time. But there's no 2024 date where neighbourhood plans cease to have any weight at all, and we have no, protection in terms of what our communities will seek from the planning system.
I think that's a good summary, and just like the district council, neighbourhood plan groups need to make sure that they review and maintain their own neighbourhood plans.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Chairman. I was on the last panel for the local plan. Nothing will ever make me forget the amount of meetings we had with residents, listening to their concerns, shaping what was coming forward. I personally am really concerned that if that time was cut down, then this is my concern, that I think residents would not be happy to accept that. They would expect to be listened to and their points to be took on board. So my question is, how long did we spend on consultation for our previous last plan, please?
I can't give you a precise figure, Councillor Webb. What I can say is that local plan took around 7 years to complete. I also know, whilst I wasn't in a substantive role within the council, I did my fair share of standing in village halls and going to parish councils and explaining the local plan through the various stages. So within that time frame, we were able to engage, I think, quite well with neighbourhood, with local groups.
Thank you. Sarah Suggett, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was satisfied with the earlier decision I made in September, but given we've now got the opportunity to clarify some of this further, can you confirm for me, please, why 6 years is the best option, the 6-year option is the best one? And if option 2 was considered, what would that mean for public and member consultation, please?
Thank you, Councillor Suggett. I should say there are pros and cons to all options. It's not a black and white decision. It's on balance of best, where we think's best. So the advantages of doing it over a 6-year period is, because as Simon's alluded to, and it's backed up by Trends Nationwide, that is an established period of time that is taken to do a substantive review of local plan. From a budget perspective, yes, there is budgetary pressure, but that's managed over 6 years rather than a condensed period of time, unlike the other option. I think it allows us a reasonable time to get the level of resourcing into the organisation that we need to complete this work effectively. And for me, perhaps the most important issue, it lies sufficient time to undertake proper consultation as part of the process.
Thank you. I've got Ian, then Phil, then Gordon, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I was comfortable when we heard this back before with option 1. And what I'm hearing today reaffirms that. I mean, one of the most important things, as far as I'm concerned, is that our communities have an opportunity. And I'm worried that if we go for a shortened period, getting that consultation with the communities in is going to be extremely difficult. And I want our communities to have a chance. So I just wanted to make that point. But the question I wanted to make, there's been a lot made of a 5-year land supply. And I just wondered if you could help all of us with that and explain exactly, what that means and the position we're in, if you could, please.
Thank you, Councillor. As members will be aware, because we've discussed it many times in open forums, the 5-year housing land supply is a crucial, if not probably the most dominant factor in terms of establishing the weight of relevant policies, particularly housing policies within a local plan. And members will be aware of the position previously when we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply, and the fact that that very often overrode and gave added weight to the benefits associated with the scheme that in other ways members and officers may feel was inappropriate. I think that's probably a more significant risk than the one that members are concerned about in relation to the November 2024 date. It's very much a factor that's out of our control. It would mean that applications for housing would be assessed primarily against national policy rather than against local plan policy. So as I said, I think that's probably a more significant risk in my professional view.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Rob, and so far Simon, for everything that he's said. Now, some of you will recall that quite a few years ago, I chaired Overview and Scrutiny Committee for a number of years. And I felt at the time, and I still feel now, that Overview and Scrutiny as a committee is one of the most significant we have in this council, because it does hold members and the council to account. That's its role. And I can recall Robin Gorham, when I sat on that committee originally, his description of it was it's a critical friend. And it should still be a critical friend. And to be frank, we're having this debate because they've actually taken that role and that view very seriously in the matter of the local plan review, and rightly so. So it's been sent back to Cabinet, to us here today, having had a fair airing at that particular committee. Members have been able to question officers subsequently. Cabinet have been able to question our officers as well about the veracity and the accuracy and the information contained in that original report that was produced in September, against which we all made a fundamentally correct decision, I believe. However, time gives us the opportunity to look again and to think a little bit longer and harder about the points that were made. Many of you will know on my register of interests, I am a registered chartered architect. So I work with local plans day in, day out in my day job. I have to say, everything I've heard from Simon Wood today is absolutely accurate. You know, as an agent working out there in the community, the one thing you loved in the previous local plan was that we didn't have a 5-year housing plan supply. That was the most significant factor in many planning applications, whether you were an individual wanting to build a house in a place that the council said you couldn't build it, or whether you were a major developer who wanted to take an opportunity, turn it into a vast profit, and deliver a number of houses in a location where we as a council particularly didn't want them. That was the risk that this council faced day in, day out at planning committee meetings. The lack of a 5-year housing land supply. It was fundamental. We now have that 5-year housing land supply, and that gives us a great deal more security than any policy in any local plan, because it prevents people wasting their own time and effort in putting spurious planning applications forward. Furthermore, as Simon has indicated, we have a number of local neighbourhood plans now in place. And as he's already indicated, the newer they are, the greater weight that can be placed upon them for the communities that they have been developed around. So I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that I have reviewed everything that we looked at before in September, and I concur with the views of our officers as explained by Rob earlier. But I want to go a little bit further. With my council hat on, you will all know that I hold the finance portfolio. This council has been very fortunate over the last few years. We have developed policies, we've developed programs of work, we've supported our local communities, we've been through COVID and come through it. I would kind of boast almost with flying colours. We've done a cracking job for our communities here in Breckland with limited resources, admittedly. We've had money from central government, admittedly. But of course, as we break out of COVID and as we move forward, we have to look to the future. And some of our plans and programs are costly, and we want to deliver upon them. But if we look at the financial position that the options before us actually lay out, the one that worries me most is option 2, because not only does it run the risk of failing to deliver on a local plan in the time frame, as we've heard, the national average is about 7 years to deliver a local plan. We've heard about the concerns of fellow members about consultation and engagement with local communities. But most importantly, in order to deliver a local plan in that short time frame, it will mean an enormous increase in resource. And that resource is staff, either directly employed or subcontractedly employed to the council, because as we all know, planning officers do not grow on trees. And certainly planning officers of the ability and quality that we need or would need to deliver a local plan of this complexity within that short time frame, it's going to be very difficult. And with my finance hat on, I'm going to have to say to members, so we're going to be spending a shed load more money in the few years to deliver a plan which may not be deliverable in that time frame. So what other programs, what other projects that we have undertaken to complete do we wish to cease? And that's a decision, frankly, that as an elected member of Breckland District, I would find it very difficult to make. Because we are elected by the people of this district, the residents, to do what we said we were going to do. And yes, we will deliver a local plan. We have to deliver a local plan. The inspector is requiring us to review part of it straight away. And we will do it. It's part of our remit. But in so doing, in that short time frame, I am afraid to say we have to stop other things. And I think that would be a tragedy for this district. We can deliver on the 6-year plan. That is absolutely correct. So, Chairman, I would urge colleagues at this cabinet meeting to stick to their guns, deal with option 1 in the way it's been recommended. We've heard the arguments and take that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I've got Councillor Bambridge, Councillor Hewitt and Councillor Sherwood again, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Like others, I attended both the Cabinet, of course, and the OSC, and I attended for the whole of that meeting. I also remind members here that I chaired the last consultation on the last local plan for well over a year, and that included well over 30 meetings in towns and villages across this district. We went to every corner of the district at that time to see what was going on. But there are 2 things I would like to be clarified, if possible. How many councils across Norfolk actually have a valid local plan? And secondly, how many councils across the country have managed to undertake a full review within a 3-year period?
I believe on the first point, Councillor Bambridge, and Simon will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's just ourselves and the Broads Authority in answer to your first point. In answer to your second point about 3 years, I can't give you a definitive answer. Local authorities have endeavoured to do in that period, but usually that's a partial review about a subject-specific issue rather than substantive review. I believe, and again, I stand to be corrected by Simon if this is wrong, that the average period of time is somewhere between 6 and 7 years for a substantive review.
Yes, I've nothing to add to that. I know Ipswich have been ambitious. It's been mentioned before, but they've still 4 years into their programme, and they're still going through the examination. So, and they're very heavily resourced as well.
Thank you. Councillor Hewitt, please.
Thank you, Sam. Phil mentioned his role in finance. I'm thinking now in terms of my challenge in terms of projects. I'm looking at the 3-year option 2, and let's be clear, it's not 3 years, as it is 2 years. It's 2 years before submission. Yeah, and then 1 year in terms, in other words, two years. And I'm trying to get my head around how can we undertake a full community consultation, do everything that is involved within essentially a 2-year timeframe to submit. So what would have to give? And whether this be to Rob, or what would have to give? I mean, would it mean that when we go out to our communities, we will say, actually, we don't have time to review these sites? To my mind, that's a cliff edge. But if we don't have time to do full community consultation, what does have to give in order to meet the option 2 timeline?
I think, Councillor, you've nailed it on the head. I think it takes away scrutiny. I think it takes away the ability of local groups and the community to scrutinise what we're doing. It takes away the ability, I think, of members to scrutinise what we're doing, because we would go for the minimum statutory requirement, and that would be a deadline. We would do that, we would do nothing else. We would be limited in terms of public events, public consultation events. That scrutiny would disappear, Councillor.
And if I get this right, the disappearing scrutiny, which would also be included within the partial review of INFO3, that would have to be in there within the timeline. That would, if you ask me, that would suggest that the partial review is more likely to fail than not if the timeframes for a full review are that tight and not involving community involvement.
I think you're right. I think there's a genuine possibility that an examiner in relation to the partial review would look very critically at an extremely ambitious timetable. I think they would question community involvement. I think they would also question the fact whether it can actually be delivered or not, and that would undermine you from the outset.
Thank you, Paul. Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. My question was actually put by a colleague, so I won't have a question, but I will just conclude, if I may, by saying what Councillor Cowan said about finances is extremely concerning. Later in this meeting, as lead member for climate change and strategy, sustainability, I'll be updating colleagues on what Breckland has achieved and what the residents have asked us to do under that climate agenda. To me, the thought that some of these ambitious and important projects across the whole district may have to be curtailed is yet another reason to ensure that we follow option 1 and allow our residents to have the say that they should be able to have. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Another, Alison.
If I can just follow on with that, please. Obviously, same reasons with Ian. I'm very concerned. Inspiring communities has been such a massive thing for Breckland. We've offered so much support to individuals when they need it. Our mental health programme has just started. It's rolling out. People need help. People need caring. People need to be listened to. Are we going to be cutting that as a result of doing the review in a shorter period? It's really, really concerning for myself. I don't want the good work that we're doing to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. So there are no other cabinet questions. So let's move it open to wider members of Breckland. If you can put your hand up nice and clearly. Obviously, cabinet didn't have any repetitive questions. If I could please implore the same from wider members to not repeat a similar question. So I've got Councillor Kybird, Councillor Attewell, Councillor Burt and Councillor Chapman. Al, in that order, please.
Thank you, Chairman. To put the option 2 has to be considered the magic money tree option. It involves spending next year 560,000 additional pounds, which, if you put that against the backdrop of we only raised 4.12 million through council tax, so that would represent 13.5% of our council tax take. Of course, if you wanted to raise the council tax by that amount, you'd have to have a referendum, and that would add a further 5%. So quite clearly, option 2 is wildly unaffordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Atwell.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to just take a little bit of time, if I may, because I was the chap that councillor that called this into review and scrutiny. I do think that's important to help cabinet members with their collective amnesia this morning. So there are a number of questions that I will raise in what I'm about to say. On Thursday last week, Sam, you kindly invited myself and Councillor Martin to a meeting here with yourself and the exec member for growth, a couple of other members from the local plan working group, director of place, director of planning, and the planning policy manager. One of the outcomes of that meeting was you agreed to provide myself and Councillor Martin with a copy of the council's legal advice on this matter. And having read this, I wish to make the following observations. This legal advice is dated the 3rd of November 2021. Given the importance of the subject matter, why was legal advice not sought by the cabinet member or planning officers prior to submitting the local plan review paper for consideration at the cabinet meeting of the 20th of September, or before in 2020, when there was a decision to pause the review, despite the June cabinet decision to proceed with a substantive review? Was no due diligence carried out last year on this before embarking on this direction of travel? Doesn't seem to me. At Thursday's meeting, Director of Planning advised that the first thing officers will do following a decision at today's cabinet meeting is to carry out a light touch desktop review of which policies need to be reviewed. You have confirmed that the reference to a review every 5 years is a decision that needs to be reached on whether there is a need to update the plan. It is also true that the entire local plan does not automatically become out of date after 5 years, although any review might well identify certain existing policies within it which may soon become out of date. It will be a matter of planning judgment as to whether individual policies become out of date. This leads me to ask, how is the desktop review, or how if the desktop review has not been carried out based on the legal advice, do you know that a local plan update is required? And if so, how have you been able to compile the cabinet reports of the 20th of September and today outlining the resources, expenditure and timetable? What exactly are you going to review? If it's a matter of planning judgment as to whether individual policies become out of date, do you not agree that the longer the local plan review takes to complete, it is more likely that the planning balance judgment will tilt in favour of deeming those policies out of date? The legal advice confirms that the substantive local plan review should proceed despite any state of flux in the present plan-making national policy regime, and that to do so will store up problems in the future decision-making on planning applications. However, the Cabinet Member for Growth and Planning Officers have continually stated that they have delayed work on a local plan review because of the unknown national picture, despite the government's own Chief Planning Officer previously stating that work should carry on. The legal advice confirms there is no excuse not to proceed with a review straight away after the existing plan was adopted 2 years ago. Why wasn't this legal advice obtained in early 2020? This council's local plan review should have been well underway by this point in time. Instead, we've had dither and delay and a timetable which has slipped from seeing completion at the end of 2024 to now being the end of 2027. This is not party political, but it's clear that myself, Councillor Martin, and experienced neighbourhood plan group, some of whom are here today, have consistently warned about slippage in the local plan review timetable. You've now had it confirmed by an expert barrister that experience shows that slippage always occurs. Seemingly out of nowhere, in the Cabinet report of the 20th of September, and now today's report, this council finds itself having at best a projected £560,000 budget shortfall to carry out this local plan review. The executive has known for 2 years that this review has to be done, yet this shortfall has not been brought to the attention of members when considering the council's budget in the intervening years. Seemingly no provision has been made in the council's finances to adequately fund this statutory review. Why have the Cabinet members for Growth and Finance not been forthcoming with this detail? Why have Governance and Audit Committee not raised this? And why is this matter not on the risk register? Regrettably, this really does look like some senior members of this council have been asleep at the wheel. The Director of Planning has advised that he might have difficulty increasing his staffing capacity to carry out the substantive review in a shorter period of time. It was decided some time ago to outsource the council's statutory planning function to Capita. This was done on the basis of projected financial savings and its alleged ability to draw down additional resources when required. The Cabinet Member for Growth and the Director of Planning have known for 2 years, that sufficient resources will be required to undertake this work. Why are they only now sharing this concern with the rest of us? Why can't some of this work be outsourced to third-party consultants if Capita cannot adequately resource this review in a timely manner? Has this been considered? The Cabinet Member for Growth has today provided you with a report outlining 3 possible options for carrying out this local plan review. Option 1 is the same proposal considered by OSC on the 28th of October and for which it resoundingly requested that Cabinet reconsiders the matter. This option also highlights a medium risk of failure to remove the policy INF 03 threat and speculative development being allowed across the district of those policies in the local plan becoming out of date. This is what you've got in your reports. Option 2 sets out the strategy for completion of the substantive review within 3 years. The key advantage of this option is that it provides the highest chance of dealing with the INF 03 threat and reduces to a low risk speculative development across the district and a low risk of policies becoming out of date. Importantly, the report says that this is achievable. You've written a report to say this is achievable. What officers have not yet produced is an associated draft timetable, local development scheme, to meet this option. In order for Cabinet to make an informed decision, I would have expected to see this information to have been provided with today's report, and that would have outlined public consultation periods, etc. Option 3, I agree with Councillor Martin's previous comment that this is risible, and it's, as it suggests, carrying out the review over 10 years. I would suggest this has only been included to try and make option 1 more attractive. In conclusion, Cabinet finds itself today having to make a difficult decision because of poor forward planning, a failure to seek legal advice earlier, a failure to plan for adequate financial resources, and its own decision to make the matter of the local plan review a partisan issue. It did not have to be this way and does not have to be going forward. I urge Cabinet members to give thorough consideration to option 2, which seeks to minimise risk to local communities from speculative development by reducing the review period. Even if the timetable for this option were to slip by a year to 2025, it is still much shorter than the period of 2027 proposed for option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There were 5, 6 questions I've got down there. Rob, do you want to start off, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll deal with a few and then I'll pass to Simon to pick up a few as well. Thank you, Councillor Attwell. In terms of why the legal advice was asked for when it was asked for after the conclusion of the overview and scrutiny meeting on the 28th of September, and it was explicitly asked to answer a number of the points raised in that meeting and to address a number of those points. So that's why it was asked for when it was asked for. In terms of the delay, you're quite correct. The legal advice does say do not delay the start of this process unnecessarily. I would argue that it's not just the uncertainty in the national policy context that has been the reason why we haven't started to date. The fact that the housing number that the inspector relied upon has changed a number of times since the inspection and was only clarified in December 2020. The fact that the definition of gypsies and travellers was outstanding and was only resolved in the High Court in the summer of 2021, and the key issue of the dualling of the A47 and its economic impact. I think we're all aware that that dualling hasn't taken place. So yes, the national policy uncertainty was a factor, but there were other factors related to the inspector's decision that meant we felt it was too early to undertake this work. In terms of the the resourcing issue, yes, you're quite right. One of the benefits of outsourcing our planning and development service to Capita is their ability to draw on resource from elsewhere in the country. We have over the last decade drawn on that resource from the Northwest and also the Northeast and Greater London as well at times when we've required that resource. That said, Capita is not immune to the challenges that all local planning authorities have in terms of the scarcity of qualified and experienced planning resource. And whilst we can use their reach that is far wider than ours as a standalone authority, they're faced with the same challenges that every local authority in the country is regarding the very scarce nature of qualified, experienced and competent planning officers. In terms of the desktop review, can I pass that to you, Simon or Andy, please?
Thank you, Rob. Yes, there's a few points I would make in terms of some of the issues raised by Councillor Attwell. In terms of the review itself, yes, officers can look at policies and can take a view as to whether or not they're required to be reviewed. The differing situation with our local plan is that we have policy INF03. INF03 requires us to review housing policies, it requires us to review employment policies, gypsy and traveller policies, as well as our national space standards. These are key issues that go to the heart of this local plan. It was always going to be inevitable that we would need to do a full review of this local plan. To do anything else would result in abortive work, and it would result in us having to redo a lot of that work going forward in order to bring other policies up to date. So it makes much more sense to do this in a single hit. Plus the fact that when you look at housing policies, when you look at employment policies, gypsy and traveller policies, they're so interconnected with environment and landscape, with climate change and sustainability, with infrastructure, transport, etc., that the whole of the plan comes back into place. So that's the reason why we're going for a full review here. And that's why we are of the professional view that all the policies are going to need to be addressed, some more than others. And it may well be as time goes on that we step back from some elements of that, depending on the progress of the plan. What I would also say is that within the legal advice, the barrister is very clear that there are other authorities that have delayed or paused. This authority isn't seeking to delay or pause. This authority is seeking to move forward with its local plan and has taken that view in advance of this legal advice, Chairman. So we are doing what he recommends. But what he does accept is that there is a change within the planning system and a need to be cautious and make sure that we can adapt to that.
Thank you. I've got, just in order, I've got Councillor Burt, Councillor Chapman-Allen, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Jeremy, Councillor Askew, then Councillor Borrett, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm here today to speak on behalf of Sam Tony. They have just completed their neighbourhood plan, which we will be considering later, agenda item 14. I have sat in on a number of their meetings. It's been a 5-year effort. They have engaged with experts and they are an extremely knowledgeable group. They are widely regarded and they have consulted across the country on the whole of the matters on the neighbourhood plan. And we would be wise to hear and consider their views. Can I quote from them directly? So they're considering, so putting that context to what they're saying here. We find it perverse, alarming, and symptomatic of the council's poor support for neighbourhood plans, in that at the same time as we are signing off our plan, it is considering a decision which will considerably weaken our plan only 2 years after it comes into force legally. Now, the group have many questions, but I'm just going to pose 2 today. The first one, they say, one of the main reasons for the local plan strategy presented by Breckland is the risk supposedly arising from planning reforms. But that overlooks that a key reform proposal is to significantly reduce the amount of time taken to complete a local plan, not increase it. Why has that fact not been taken into account? My second question, they say that we have no faith in the council's ability to effectively project manage this major task in a way that avoids hugely damaging impact on communities, coupled with runaway costs and an ever lengthening timescale. Why has no detailed task-based project plan been prepared and risk assessed to establish the manpower needs, costs, timetables, instead of the meagre example provided?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baird. Rob, please.
Thank you, Councillor Burt. Again, I think it'll be double act. I'll start and then I'll pass to Simon if that's okay. There are a number of statements in there, Councillor Burt, that whilst I hear and I have to respect the opinion of the neighbour planning team at Same Tony, I just don't agree with. I don't agree with the statement that there's poor support for neighbour plans within Breckland. I just don't agree with that. And I don't agree with the statement that their plan will be weakened automatically after 2 years. I don't agree with those statements. In terms of planning reform, I think I answered in the previous question, planning reform was a factor, but it wasn't the only factor in our decision to bring this forward at this point in time. I think you'll appreciate that the new Secretary of State has paused the planning reform, so it'd be very difficult for us to speculate or understand exactly what the makeup of that reform is, given the current process is paused. In terms of effective project management, again, I don't agree with the runaway costs and timescales. We have an extremely experienced planning team here at Breckland, and it's their experience and their qualification in terms of producing local plans previously, undergoing a number of inspections nationwide, not just behalf of this authority, but on a number of authorities elsewhere. And we have to rely on their opinion and advice as professional planning officers, and I think that's what we're doing. So I don't accept there are runaway costs and timescales. I accept that the 2 preferential options here, option 1 and option 2, both have increased cost above budget. You know, budgets are set for a reason. Sometimes costs come in above budget, and particularly with option 2, you're looking at a profile issue as well as a quantum issue. It's condensing the spend to a smaller number of years, hence you see a larger impact than the next financial year. But I don't accept that they're runaway costs and timescales. I think they're developed on the basis of sound professional advice from an experienced planning policy team. Simon, I don't know if you want to pick anything up.
Nothing substantive, Rob. I'd just make the point that Councillor Burt's correct, that one of the issues around the planning reforms was the fact that you would be doing plans quicker with reduced consultation. And my clear understanding, reading the planning press, etc., is that that's one of the major issues for the communities at large, certainly for local politicians, both at parish, town and district level. And that's one of the reasons why those reforms have been paused. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman-Allen.
Doesn't want to go good. Oh, there we are. Thank you, Chairman. I'd concur with Councillor Bambridge with what he said earlier, that we are the only district council, apart from Broadland, to have an adopted local plan in place, something I think we should be very proud of. And I do seem to think that we have an awful lot of newly elected members who seem to think that they have the expertise of our highly qualified officers. But, you know, members are here to challenge officers, so that's fine. And I'd like to mention, Chairman, the submission that came from NP4 Yaxham, the submission letter that came out to all the councillors. I see Councillor Martin is, I don't think he's in the room. So I can't ask him the question, I would ask them not to be so parochial, as we have 112 parishes and 37 districts in Breckland to consider, not just the north of the district. But my question to him, if he'd been here, is to ask why Kilverstone and Brettonham were mentioned in the submission letter. They were one of the first to have a local plan, community involvement in place. I used to be the councillor for that parish, and I understand that the chairman of Kilverstone and Brettonham Parish Council has not queried whatsoever this issue of the timeline and the local plan. So that was more of a comment than a question, Chairman. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thanks for moving to Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Leader. If you'll indulge me, it's not really a question, it's an observation, and I feel it's important for me as a member to get my observations out there. You've heard all about the consultations we had before we made our local plan, and that engaged all the villagers who was concerned across the district, and they was all happy. They was all had the confidence in the planning system we've got here and the officers. What has upset me, if that's the right word, is the email that went out to the block email went out after the call in to all the town and parish councils. I've had 3 of mine call me up and said, what the hell's going on? We had the faith, we thought this was all settled. We're quite happy to have faith in the council to carry this forward, and is our local plans waste of time? And I had to say, no, they're not. And you've heard this morning, they still carry weight. We have got a planning policy. It does work. The land has been brought forward in the local plan, which is still there to be built on. That was all agreed by members and members of the public. Housing quotation numbers are still there. They've actually worked in one of my parishes recently, which actually I would have supported this development, but the officer said, no, you've had your quota of houses, and that's fine. So what I'm trying to say, Leader, is that we have got a local plan. I have got confidence in it, and the comments of not supporting the parishes with their neighbourhood plans is a bit crass to say that, because we do support those villages with financial support for their neighbourhood plans. And to say we've got it's going to be open market for, as I said, we've got a planning system, we've got diligent officers. It's a bit crass to say that it's open to free for all developers building. I've sit on the parish on the planning committee here. There's developers coming in now. They're not hitting us with, oh, I brought this to you because you haven't got a 5-year land supply. That's disappeared this last 2 years. They understand now we've got this land supply, and they have to conform and put just positive applications in. And I felt it's a bit of a NIMBY comment that we haven't got protection and we've got this cliff edge for our parishes. Well, that is totally wrong. If people listen, and in particular the press, listen to what's been said here this morning, the positive and the legal side of things, then we have got no issues going forward and waiting for this plan to be renewed in a legal proper timeline and without using any more finance. What benefits residents more is what we do for them, the health and well-being, putting facilities in for them. That's what our residents like. They don't necessarily care about legal terms and different things for local plans. They're quite confident in what we've already done.
Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Jeremy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may just respond to a previous point. Councillor Ian Martin is having surgery this morning. I am quite sure would have much rather have been here, but he's been ably representing his community scrutiny. And there is a slight irony that I'm sure is in as much pain having surgery as it would have been if he were here listening to some of the comments, frankly. But if I may, Chairman, this is not a council whereby opposition councillors routinely call in decisions made by the Cabinet. It happens on a fairly infrequent basis where there is clear reasoning to do so. It is rarer still at the Scrutiny Commission meeting whereby that call-in is discussed, that call-in is upheld and referred back to the Cabinet, as is the case today. And not by a narrow margin, but with a clear mandate, 9 councillors in support, 6 Conservatives and 3 opposition members, resolving that Cabinet needs to think again on the timetable for the local plan and providing for an opportunity for the issue to be reconsidered today. The only member of the Commission to vote in favour of the Cabinet's original decision came from the current Vice Chairman of the Council's Planning Committee. With all that in mind, for the Cabinet today to make no concessions at all and to not amend its approach in any way and to plough on regardless weakens our democratic processes and the role of scrutiny in a Cabinet system such as ours. We heard at scrutiny from those community representatives who are so passionate and so knowledgeable about this topic. They demonstrated that passion and their knowledge, and frankly, this council should be working with them. We serve the same people. Many of us want the same outcomes. Initially, the delays to the local plan timetable were blamed on uncertainty caused by possible government changes to planning legislation, a notion now categorically squashed. Now the resources in terms of money and staffing capacity appear to be the main justification for the delay. And in this regard, I do at least have some sympathy for the current Cabinet, who have been poorly served by their predecessors, who have not been putting sufficient funds to one side to resource this issue, not sufficiently aware of the risks, it seems, and arguably asleep at the wheel. What we have is an entirely avoidable position if the issue was given proper planning, proper priority, and the proper political will, which has been sadly missing. One of the saddest side effects of this extended time period for the review of this review is that neighbourhood plans will be weakened by the now weakened Breckland local plan. Neighbourhood plans were established through the Localism Act and sought to increase community involvement with planning. Having spent many years working on and putting their plans to referenda, many Breckland communities will inevitably be left asking if it was all worth it. This is an entirely avoidable outcome. The irony of those advocating to plough on regardless because of concerns about a lack of consultation. Don't worry about meeting in village halls in the future. You can meet in the shiny new houses that will be popping up around you. It's all too little, too late. In short, to quote a young Swedish activist, too much blah, blah, blah. In conclusion, Chairman, I firmly believe in a community-led planning process, and Cabinet, in reaching your decision today, will be moving our district further away from that. And it will be squarely Breckland residents and communities, particularly in the parishes, impacted by this, and not just in the years ahead, but in the many years ahead. Myself and opposition colleagues have been keen not to make this about party politics. It goes above political dogma. That said, members with knowledge far greater than mine have been excluded from the process with the local plan working group that has consisted of members entirely from amongst the Conservative group. The continuation of that working group in that format and the failure to grasp the opportunity to amend your approach today makes it perfectly clear that this is without doubt your local plan, and the success or failure of it will be yours alone in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Askew, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a long time since I've been to a Cabinet meeting or made a speech at all, but I feel I need to today, and I guess it's good to see democracy at work. And by that, I mean that a function of this council, the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, doing its job by providing checks and balances, empowering members to probe and question officers, Cabinet, and outside body decisions to ensure the best results possible for the residents that we represent. That's what it's all about. Running a local authority and providing essential and discretionary services is a serious business, and one which the decisions made have implications for all residents of this fine district, which include the decision makers themselves, As a backbench member and a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, I am pleased to be able to have another chance to revisit items which from time to time throw up questions at the 11th hour, which we are duty bound to consider and address. It's right and proper when decisions of such magnitude need to be made. It's good governance. This council employs experts in their field to advise and enact policy, and while it's completely right for members to challenge officers' reports and recommendations, we ignore them at our peril. With regard to the local plan, I am reassured that the Cabinet's original decision is the right and only one, which will be the best for the district. The Cabinet Member for Finance has outlined a position frankly and clearly, and there's no doubt that funding local government is a very different ballgame than it was when I first joined the council in 2003. I, for one, as a local member, have good cause for wanting to keep providing discretionary services to help support the vulnerable. Over my tenure, I've had occasion to call on these services, particularly during lockdown and even as recently as last week. Services which will be seriously under threat if the Cabinet's original decision is reversed. And I didn't come into local politics with a view of reducing provision to the vulnerable. In a democracy, it's the opposition's job to oppose, and I acknowledge that it's a frustrating place to be. Unable to put your own policies in place, constantly losing proposed motions and votes, etc. However, it still comes with huge responsibility and to do what's right for the residents of Breckland. Which is why it's, well, I was going to say disappointing, but it's a bit sad, I feel, that some opposition members are hijacking a legitimate and genuine call-in procedure to attempt to make some cheap political capital at the expense of making the right decisions for Breckland's residents. It's regrettable that political party purposes are coming before the serious business of running a council to provide the services the district needs with ever constricting budgets. And having had the chance to revisit the officer's report, I believe that the Cabinet should continue with selecting option one as it's the only real option open to us to protect the residents in the longer term. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Wickerson, then Councillor Borrett, please.
Thank you, Chair. That's it. Thank you, Chair. If I may, following up on some of the comments that have been made about our local councils, our parish councils, and our local parishioners, if I may, I would like to share with everybody here today an email that was sent by the Town Clerk of Swaffham Town Council on the 11th of November, to which he has not received a reply, by the way. At your Cabinet meeting on the 15th of November, you have an item 8A call
Councillor
in.
Wickerson, sorry, we Cabinet have received the correspondence from the Clerk of Swaffham Town Council. I will reply to all clerks who have taken the time to write to me once the decision is made. So for brevity purposes, I don't need the email correspondence from the clerk repeating. If you have an individual statement you wish to make as the Breckland representative for Swaffham, or wish to pull out any pertinent questions or points from the communication from the clerk, I'll be most welcome to hear it, but I don't need the email which I've already received reading to me again. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I acknowledge your comments, but I'm saddened by those comments because there are other people here who are not in the Cabinet who might wish to hear and know of the views of Swaffham Town Council, the unanimous decision that they made at their committee meeting. Thank you.
I'm sure they'll be delighted if you would afford that communication on to them, Councillor Wickerson. Thank you. Councillor Borrett, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'd like to start by congratulating the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for bringing it back here, because it is important that not only that we make the right decision at Breckland, but that everybody can see that the right decision has been made. And this is obviously, and I've listened very closely to everything that's been said here this morning, is a very emotive area, and that is important because it shows people care about where they live and about their councils. So I think the emotion is really good. I think it's something that shows that the members and the people here respect Breckland and what happens here. That the meeting, there was a lot of emotive language at the overview and scrutiny meeting, and I think it was quite right that there was enough concern amongst the members that the majority Conservative members on the committee said, okay, what we'll do is, because people are worried about this, we will take it back to Cabinet again, and we will ask Cabinet to make sure that they made the right decision. And we've heard from the lead officers that barrister's opinion was then sought to give extra reassurance that the right decision was made. Now, they didn't know what the advice would be, because the barrister, you pay the barrister for the advice, you get what you're given. And it happens that the barrister's advice has supported the decision that the Cabinet made. I think that it's also, from this morning, has thrown up the things that would be lost if the proposal that Roger Attewell was making be taken. That it would be possible to try and curtail the delivery of the local plan, but at the expense of the consultation with the people who it would affect. There is a statutory timetable that the council has to give. But in the past, and I've been involved in the previous local plan, we allowed, I think, 3 times the amount of consultation that was statutory allowed. And even then, a lot of people didn't feel that was enough consultation. So the pressures of that, Councillor Attewell says, and I quote, slippage always occurs with the delivery of the local plan. So to try and shoehorn it in to an undeliverable period, and then I suppose that it wouldn't be possible to do, and that would be another thing to blame the council for setting an unrealistic timetable that was undeliverable, and that would be another failure on behalf of Cabinet. So to say that we have a proposal here in front of us, that the weight of the officers, independent legal advice, support, to say this is the safest and most responsible way of dealing with the issue, which is, because of confusion at central government, I agree, less than ideal, but this is the safest and most responsible way of dealing with this issue, is to reaffirm the decision. And because overview and scrutiny called it in, we've had the chance to go through all of this with everybody in great detail to make sure the right decision has been made. So I endorse the proposal that Cabinet made, but I also thank Overview and Scrutiny for giving us this opportunity today.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Digan, please.
Actually, this just goes back to something Vague might say earlier, which funnily enough hasn't been brought up. Reference neighbourhood plan allocations. Am I right? And I think probably the officer said answer that if a neighbourhood a council has a neighbourhood allocation, that would, in the event, and we hope that it doesn't occur, that we have 5-year land supplies problems again, where's the allocation? That would give extra weight against developers in those particular villages going outside what neighbourhood allocations had said. And perhaps one of the things we need to keep an eye on for all councils is where they've got neighbourhood plans, is actually keeping them up to date, and perhaps with allocations within them. I know 1 or 2 people out in the villages don't think that they should ever have anything built ever again, but we in the towns do sometimes feel that perhaps the villages wag the town's tails quite often, and it's okay for towns to get all the development, but not the villages. But so I would encourage perhaps all villages to at least have some form of allocation there, so that it's defendable at a planning inquiry. Sorry, hang on.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Digan. I think it's safe to say that in the scenario that a local authority doesn't have a 5-year housing land supply, a neighbourhood plan that is less than 2 years old and has allocations within it will still continue to carry full weight, and decisions can be made against it. I think it's probably advisable to neighbourhood plan groups to look at allocations, but also to look at keeping their policies under review as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the representative from Yaxon Neighbourhood Plan. There's a microphone on this far table if you'd like to come forward, then followed by the representative from Mattershall Parish Council and then Rocklands Parish Council. Just while Maggie prepares herself, Councillor Atholl, you indicated you wish to speak again.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't believe that I got a response to a couple of very key points that I asked in my questions, which I would appreciate a response. One of those is, I suppose what I'm really asking is, you've known that you've got to do this local plan review as far back as 2019. What provision have you been putting in the budget for the last 2 years to carry out this? Because it seems to me that you haven't put anything aside, which is why we now find ourselves with the shortfall. And also, I direct this one to the Director of Planning, if I may, about policies and when they lose weight in the planning balance. It's quite clear from what I read from the barrister's report, and I think from what you've said this morning, is that the longer it goes on after the 5-year period is up at the end of 2024, the longer the period goes on after that, planning policies will start to carry less weight. That's the concern. The concern is that 3-year period after 2024. So will they carry less weight the longer this goes on? Also, to answer Councillor Borrett's point about slippage, it was actually the barrister in his response to this council who said there is always slippage when these reviews are carried out. So my concern is that there will be slippage beyond 2027. So we'll instead have a 6-year period, we will get the momentum and thing will slip into 28, 29, etc. That was what was in, that was not me saying it, it was the barrister. And finally, one for you, Sam, if I may. I understand from Councillor Martin that he submitted a report to you with some comments that I believe you agreed that you would read out on his behalf this morning because he's in surgery and he cannot make the meeting. Will you be reading those comments out? Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start off with finances with Rob, then Simon for the technical piece of Dayton, and then I'll finish off with Councillor Martins. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Atholl. The finances are presented as in the report. The budget position is the budget position as provided in the table, and the additional funding required for both options, for all 3 options are presented as in the report. So, well, I am answering the question because the budget is as presented in the report, and the requirement to do the work of options 1 and 2 and 3 is included, which shows a growth on that budgeted position. So the budget clearly didn't include sufficient funds for all of those 2 options.
Thank you, Rob. In response to policy, the weight you give to policies is judged by a number of different factors. It's whether the policies are still achieving what they're set out to achieve. But one of the biggest things is whether or not they're still in compliance with the national framework and national planning guidance. So I think it's a bit simplistic to say that the older a policy is, the less weight it carries in terms of making planning decisions. Some policies will carry more weight. You've read the barrister's response, haven't you? And the barrister talks about a basket of policies, and within that basket of policies they will address different issues. Policies around things such as the BRECs, for example, which are European designated areas and have significant protection, they're unlikely to change over time unless that legislation or those policies change. Housing allocations, housing numbers, they may well change because we may get new housing figures, we may not have a 5-year housing land supply. There may be changes within national policy that require you to address those. So I think to just turn around and say, yes, they will diminish over time is, as I said, probably a bit too simplistic. They may, yes. I can't sit here and say that they may or they may not. It is,
Councillor
It
Attwell,
is.
Councillor Attwell, please let the
and-
officer finish and then.
That's fine. They may well lose weight over time because of their age, but you can't say that that is a definitive view.
Thank you. Maggie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was not expecting to be invited to speak today, so thank you very much. I would just pick up on a few points that have been made. As far as the parishes are concerned, we have the local plan, and we also, some of us, only 6, I have to say, and Sam Tony hopefully coming later, that makes 7 within the district. However, we all know where we start, where the starting point is. We understand now we have a 5-year housing land supply. As far as my own village of Yaxham is concerned, we are well over our housing allocation, about 100% over, despite the local plan and despite the neighbourhood plan. So we are wondering what is going to happen in the 3-year gap between this local plan going out of date and what the intervening period is going to be as far as developers are concerned, because developers have been quite happily buying up green fields in many parishes in between times, just waiting for the starting gun. I would say the housing and the settlement boundaries are actually nothing to do with neighbourhood plans. We have to accept what either government says or the local plan says. So we have no jurisdiction over settlement boundaries. And so even if we review our neighbourhood plans, it won't make any difference as far as that's concerned. And as far as the budget shortfall is concerned, I mean, your vanity projects are very good. I understand you spent about 780,000 upgrading this building. So did you not understand that you had a mandatory obligation to put in the budget requirement to update the local plan within the mandatory 5-year period? I don't understand why that wasn't in place, and that is up to the executive to put right. And so as far as the projects are concerned, yes, we have been very grateful for all the help that Breckland has given, certainly during the COVID times, and the projects are much appreciated. However, none of you will be appreciated when all the communities find in their parishes they have got tacked on estates at the end because the settlement boundaries have been out of date. And that will be up to you, councillors. So, and I would just say that Councillor Chapman talked about comments made from the Breckland parishes. We do include all councillors, all parish councillors who wish to contribute. It is not only the chairman, it is not a top-down situation, it is everybody. And I would also suggest perhaps it would be a good idea, now that you want consultation and you feel you haven't got enough consultation with the parishes, why don't you just start going out to the parishes and asking them what they want from a new plan? What about infrastructure? I don't think I've had that word said once. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Somebody happy to respond to the question around the time gap, particularly around Yaxham and what that means for their community?
Thank you, Chairman. The Yaxham and Mattershall neighbourhood plans were made around 2017, which is some 4 or 5 years ago. I've already outlined the fact that neighbourhood plans will weaken over time in exactly the same way that local plans will, and that it's important that they keep themselves under review as well. And certainly that's one of the views that that is made in the legal advice that's already been quoted, Chairman. I also heard the comment that developers are buying up land. That may well be in anticipation of several events. It may well be in anticipation of a need for this authority to find additional housing through a call for sites and through a local plan review. I've also heard that Mattershall and Yaxham have delivered a significant number of houses I think it was double the number was quoted. All figures in any local plan, in any neighbourhood plan, were always minimum, and any housing application has to be assessed against that development plan and that neighbourhood plan.
Thank you. And it's the final piece on budget position. Maggie, I think Rob Walker responded to the majority of that around the budget position. In relation to your comments around the vanity project, the vast majority of your phrase came from a capital funding. Capital can't be used for revenue costs. It's a frustration of how Her Majesty's Treasury dictate council spend money. So we couldn't use it for this type of work, which is a revenue cost for officers. Graham, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm speaking on behalf of Mashfield Parish Council this morning. We are deeply concerned about the time being taken, which is why we would insist that option 2 be the only option that is really sensible. Yes, it may exceed there may be slippage with option 2, but it is better to start than, in our opinion, delay. And it seems to me that, or it seems to the parish rather, that we are better off getting on with it. We should have had the budget in place for this because we knew it was coming. I mean, as a parish, we budget way in advance. Why can't the district do that? Because you knew that you had to carry out this statutory obligation. The fund should be there, plus a contingency. Nobody's mentioned a contingency in the budget. Why can't we use a contingency, assuming it's there? So we have a number of very knowledgeable former planners within our area, and they are deeply concerned that we seem to be considering option 1 as opposed to option 2. Option 2 seems the common sense approach. With option 2, one of the disadvantages, or one of the primary disadvantages that has been quoted, is the lack of resource. The reason that Capita were employed was because they had this pool of resource that they could draw on. If that's now not the case, then perhaps we need to look at what strategy the district is employing in that respect. There are plenty of specialist consultants out there who have a great deal of experience and knowledge in local plans, and we can tap into those. But again, if it is budget constraints that are holding us back, then once again, we should have seen this coming. We should have planned for it in advance. And to pick up a point earlier on, planners do planning. Planners are not necessarily project managers. Project managers specialize in setting out timetables, having risk assessments in place, and making sure that every function is carried out not in sequence, but concurrently where it can be. So our opinion is that a project manager should oversee this, and hopefully then we will get greater efficiencies for our time and our budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Lovely, thank you much indeed, sir. Rob.
Yeah, thank you very much for those comments. I think a number of them have been addressed earlier, but just a couple to pick up our the point around Capita and outsourcing of the contract and drawing on the resources that Capita have available in their wider family. As I think I mentioned earlier, of course, we will use every opportunity through the Capita family to bring in additional resource, but they are constrained in the same way as most local authorities within the UK. There is a national shortage of qualified and experienced planners. We are in an advantageous position. We have previously drawn in planners through the Capita contract from elsewhere in the UK. So we do have that advantage, but we're working in a pool where the number of planners is a finite pool. In terms of using specialist consultants, whenever we prepare a local plan, we use specialist consultants. There are specific pieces of work that require a specialism that we don't hold by default or within the core officer team that support a local plan. So it is accepted practice to use specialist consultants in the production of a local plan, and that would be the case in whichever option we took forward today. I appreciate the point about project managers. As a local government officer, I think I've spent the last 10 to 15 years being told there's always slippage and there's always bureaucracy and you always take longer than you should. But I understand the point about we should go as quickly as is possible. I'm not sure I share the belief that a project manager is the solution to this issue. I think as we said before, we have a qualified and experienced team who understand the requirements of producing a local plan, which is a long and complicated and detailed process that involves a range of different stakeholders and a range of different communities that need to be consulted. So whilst I appreciate the sentiment that policies diminish over time and that we should seek to do this as pragmatically in an achievable and realistic way of delivering this forward in a suitable timescale, but I don't agree that the solution is putting this under a project manager, but we have a team in place. Simon, I don't know if I've missed anything you should. Okay, thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you very much. Richard, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Cabinet. I apologise in advance. Some of the issues I'm going to raise have already been raised, but I would wish to reinforce those. Rocklands Parish Council objects in the strongest possible terms to the timescales proposed for the local plan review as submitted to Cabinet at its meeting on 20th September and as modified and prepared for submission to this meeting. The Town and Country Local Planning England Regulations 2012 as amended, the National Planning Policy Framework and the current adopted local plan as approved by Her Majesty's Planning Inspectorate all specify clear timescales for the completion and submission of both a partial review of the plan and a full review of the plan. The former is set out in policy INF 03 of the current local plan, and the latter in regulation 10A of the aforementioned regulations. The current proposals for the local plan review failed to meet these requirements. The consequences of this will mean that the council's policies that relate to the supply of housing, economic development and gypsies and travellers will be deemed out of date or at worst, at the best, severely weakened. These will result in those communities who already have a neighbourhood plan having that too deemed out of date or severely weakened. The current proposals amount to almost a complete rewrite of the local plan, something which is not required either by legislation, related national or local policies. At the Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting held on the 28th of October, officers sought to reassure parish representatives that their neighbourhood plan policies would still hold some weight in planning decisions, but have since declined to guarantee that. Those communities which have been working hard on their local neighbourhood plans, but have not yet had them go to referendum and be adopted, will have little protection from speculative and uncontrolled development. Those communities without a neighbourhood plan at all will have little protection. The Planning Committee will have greatly reduced powers to prevent such development. I'd like to pick up on a comment that Councillor Digan made earlier about some communities not wanting any housing at all. In the case of Rocklands, we would take great exception to that. We are currently more than 100% in excess of our housing allocation. So we are not a NIMBY community. We're over 100% in excess of our current housing allocation. Officers have argued that delayed and extended timescales are necessary to account for possible changes in national policies and directions. This does not stand up. We live in a continuous, constantly changing, fluid environment. There is never a right time to start work on policy or legislation making. A smart, modular, flexible modular approach, which will be more adaptable to change, is what's really needed. The council exists to serve and support the needs of local communities, yet there has been no consultation whatsoever on the proposed significant changes to the local plan review process with the council's own local planning working group, who were not consulted, parish councils or neighbourhood plan working groups. Consultation and review is an ongoing process, and as others have already remarked, consultation and review should have started from the day that the current local plan was adopted, at no time later. We request that Cabinet resolve that the current proposals are thoroughly reviewed with relevant stakeholders and that a realistic and shorter timetable is produced. If one of the so far published options must be selected, then we see no reason at all why option 2 has not been chosen. This would give the minimum gap between the current plan and the revised plan and therefore minimize exposure to risk. Communities must have the reassurance that there will be continuity of an up-to-date local plan, protect ourselves from speculative and uncontrolled development. Thank you.
Thank you much indeed, sir. So Rob, do you want to start? No, Simon?
Thank you. Just very, very quickly that, as it's been mentioned before, in terms of the council's opinion that we saw, there's nothing to stop neighbourhood plans continuing. And I noticed that Rocklands has had ambitions for some time to do a neighbourhood plan, and there's still no reason why they shouldn't look at doing one if they wish to do so.
Thank you. Just some other questions which were raised from Richard. Why is the recommendation from officers in their professional opinion that a complete rewrite is required? What is the risk for parishes without a neighbourhood plan once we get to the 2024 timeframe? What does this mean for the planning committee under the democratic ability when we get growth or applications which sit outside of the 2024 date? And what reassurances have we got in relation to ongoing consultation if Cabinet is minded to make a decision today for those parishes across the district? I think they're the questions which weren't answered, sir.
Thank you. Just at risk of repeating, really. In terms of why we're going for a full review, it's because effectively the neighbourhood plan is a complete suite of documents, all of which are interrelated, all of which have impacts on others, and it's very difficult to pull out a specific policy, a discrete policy, and particularly when you're looking at housing and employment allocations, and just focusing on them. So that's why we feel that it's more appropriate to look at the local plan as a whole. In terms of the November 2024 date, again, the point's been made that that's not a cliff edge, that it's more of a slope, and the policies will be addressed over time, having regard to their effectiveness, their compliance with national guidance, etc., and weight established to them accordingly, and that's a matter of planning judgment. And that's the position that the planning committee will have to take in terms of making decisions. They will weigh up many material considerations, the age of the plan, 5-year housing land supply, which potentially could be the most significant one there, whether the plan is still delivering development, how policies comply with national policy, and all relevant material considerations, including, if appropriate, a neighbourhood plan, the weight of that neighbourhood plan, its age, and whether or not it allocates for development within its neighbourhood plan area. And in terms of consultation with parishes, at the heart of every local plan review, and this was done during the last local plan, there will be consultation and engagement with parish and town councils during that process, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. Right to reply from Councillor Digan, and then
actually, I think he, in the end, the gentleman did say some councils, and I wasn't casting any. In fact, I rather support places like Rocklands, and it's funny enough, Swanton Morley and Yaxham, who actually do take an interest and actually do realise that they have to accept, you know, some development. My point was that there's many villagers who just want to put the drawbridge up totally, and expect the towns to take the whole weight. Because, you know, as I say, and, you know, we in the town sort of feel sometimes a bit aggrieved. And can I say that the villagers actually got the same amount of money for neighbourhood plans as the towns get. And the towns obviously have to deal with very much more larger and complex problems than the villagers. So just another point there.
Thank you. And on the back of the representation from Yaxham Neighbourhood Plan and Mashall Parish Council, I did receive written representation from Councillor Martin, who can't be present today. The majority of your questions were asked by those two representatives. There was one question which Councillor Martin, out of his 4, did write to me and ask, and I will go against the convention and take it as a written form, as he is incapacitated with dental work today. The question, please, Simon, is option 2 delivers the highest chance of removing the threat of INF 03. Why would it not be therefore the best outcome for officers to recommend option 2 to ensure that INF 03 survives?
Thank you, Chairman. We have to balance option 2 with everything else. And if we were able to persuade an inspectorate examination that we could actually deliver a local plan within 3 years, then I'm sure he'd welcome that with open arms. But for the reasons we've gone into here, you have to budget that against the budgetary restrictions, issues around staffing, issues around effective consultation, and the fact that, to my knowledge and to colleagues' knowledge, no local authority has delivered a plan within that sort of time frame. And I made the point earlier that an examining inspector would need to be satisfied that an approach was realistic. And on that basis, I think we would be much better going for a realistic and achievable option rather than this. I accept the argument around ambition, but ambition needs to be sensible. And weighing everything in the balance, I don't think an examiner would give much support to that when we look at everything in the round.
Thank you. My final hand, which presented prior to the 3 representatives speaking, is Councillor Borrett, and then we'll move to the recommendations, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 things, and one, I have great sympathy for Mattershall, who have taken a lot of housing, but that isn't because of inadequacies in the local plan. That was to do with the lack of a 5-year housing land supply, and that is being the main engine for growth where people don't want it, including the members of this council. And while we have a 5-year land supply, the plan is key. Obviously, whether we have it or not is out of the control of Breckland, because it depends on permissions being granted within the plan. So, but it isn't a decision of the members of this council. When it happens, it's a government policy. But I just wanted to come back on the point about slippage. And I'm glad that it was the independent barrister who said that slippage always occurs, because with the weight of an expert behind it, it shows how absolutely vital it is that option 1, the one chosen by the cabinet and being reinforced by the officers today, is the one that should be granted and adopted by the council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Borrett. Rob, are you happy to summarise the options as presented?
Thank you, Chairman. So, members of Cabinet, you have in front of you 2 principal options. Both option 1 and 2 require a partial review of INF 03 to be submitted by November 2022 and are consistent on that part. For option 1 would see a substantive review of the local plan submitted by November 2026 with inspection in 2027. Option 2 would see a substantive review of the local plan submitted November 2023 with inspection in 2024. As is clearly apparent in the discussion we've had this morning, none of the options presented to you are without benefits and costs, but it's on the balance of the realism and the achievability of delivering a local plan within the accepted timescale that officers recommend option 1 is accepted and agreed by Cabinet, and the recommendations are detailed accordingly on page 24 of the page 14 of the agenda pack. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Rob. So before I invite the Cabinet member to move the recommendations, can I just thank members of the public who have engaged, the parish councils who have taken the time to write to me and colleagues, those parish councils who attended the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, and those members of the Commission who spoke so passionately. And as has been alluded to several times, that democracy has stood the test. It's allowed the Cabinet to review that previous decision in light of some of the concerns which were raised. And I believe that today we've been immensely transparent in the evidence from officers, the council's opinion, confirm some of the language, but absolutely in relation to some of those responses, we are acutely aware of some of those further risks in how we proceed moving forward. We as a Cabinet, before you make your decision, need to ensure that we are managing expectations within the local plan, as it has always been within our constitution. That decision sits with this Cabinet to how we move forward, and under this process it sits with the Cabinet member responsible. Once this Cabinet has made the decision today, that work then commences in earnest, and it will be for the members of all of this council to ensure that we're expediting this process as quickly as possible, ensuring that consultation is at the heart of everything we do, that we're taking residents and parishes and businesses with us through this process, and delivering once again a long-term local plan, which will see us not to the 5 years, but some 15 years into the future. And if you look around at some of our colleagues across Norfolk, they are still struggling to get a local plan. This council has a local plan, which was adopted in December 2019. The local plan has given us some security, but that security predominantly, as you heard from the Director of Planning, sits around having a 5-year housing land supply. That is the single biggest risk to this council. The officers in their professional judgment have recommended option 1 to this Cabinet for numerous reasons, through resources, finance, management expectation, and the ability for when we submit INF 03 for the inspector to understand that that is a realistic and achievable target. You've heard today that if we submit a shorter timeframe, that there could be a risk that the inspector thinks that is an unachievable target and may therefore not wish to proceed with the review of INF 03 or reject our timeframe for a full review. You've heard the reasons as why we wish to review a whole local plan rather than just piecemeal. That is a sequential exercise, that once we start some of those important pieces through INF 03, there will be mitigations and substantial changes across the rest of the local plan. And once that is commenced, there is therefore a sequential process to go through. Planning piece A influences B, B influences C, and so forth and so on. So, Councillor Clausen, are you happy to move the recommendation to Cabinet colleagues, please?
Chairman, thank you. Yes, I'm more than happy to move that recommendation.
Thank you, Cabinet colleagues. So the recommendation from Cabinet is for option 1 as presented within the Cabinet agenda pack. Can I have a show of hands? All those in favour? That's a unanimous decision. Thank you very much indeed. Following this meeting, I will write to all parish councils across the district to advise them as to what the decision means and how that will impact, and to ask for your support as we move forward through that engagement process. And likewise, I'll write to all members of this council to make them aware of that process, so you have the ability to answer any questions you may receive from residents or your parishes as of this point in time. We're now coming up to 20 minutes past 11. I'd like to adjourn the meeting for a 5-minute comfort break, but for that I have to move that recommendation to colleagues of the Cabinet.